Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Hello dear students, welcome to another lecture. In this lecture, we are going to continue with chapter 5 of class 10th alternative English, which is the ambitious guest. Now so far we have read about this family whose house was situated at a very dangerous spot where there was a mountain towering over their head and they were in continuous danger of a falling stone every now and then. We read that this family, the house, the cottage that they had basically was a kind of a inn. It was a hotel where the people who would pass that notch, who would cross that notch, would at times stay to spend a night or a couple of hours. We then read about this guest who turned up on their door. This ambitious guest, when he came, he brought along with himself a very depressive kind of, the movement of sounds of the air. So on his entrance, the moment he entered the house, there was very sharp and strong wind which was blowing. But the sound of that wind has been compared to a wailing, to a crying sound, which is something which is very negative as well as depressive. So his entry is associated with something bad that was going to happen. Then we read that this guest, the reason why he has been called as ambitious is because he shared with the family his desire that once he dies, he wants people to remember him. And therefore, he wanted a statue or a monument to be built under his name. Then gradually the other people of the family also started to open up, and the owner of the family, the man of the family, he told him that even he had the same desire. He also wanted to live at a place which was surrounded by good neighbors, and he wanted to be a squire, and he wanted that when he dies there should be a good hymn, a good poem to be written on his tomb. So this is what we have read till now. We'll continue further and see what course of action the knight takes. So, "There now," exclaimed the stranger, "it is our nature to desire a monument, be it slate or marble, or a pillar of granite, or a glorious memory in the universal heart of man." So the moment the person, the owner of the house, also expressed his desire to be a squire, when he becomes old and to be remembered after he dies, the stranger exclaims that, "You see, it is our nature, it is the nature of every human being to wish for themselves something good, to be remembered. It can be a monument. That monument may either be made of slate or marble, or it can even be a pillar which is made of granite. But what we want is a glorious memory. We just want people to remember us in their minds and in their hearts. This is what everyone desires." "We are in a strange way tonight," said the wife with tears in her eyes. "They say it's a sign of something when folks' minds go on a wandering so. Hark to the children." Now when the wife listened to to her husband's desire of being a squire and of having a tomb with a hymn written on it, she got a bit emotional and she said that this night is a very strange one. There's something very different about tonight. And she even said that, it is a saying, it is usually said that when our minds go wandering is when they go haywire, when they are not going in the actual and the normal direction, but they just roam around here and there the way theirs were doing at that time. So she said that when this happens, there is a reason behind it. When we start thinking wildly, there is a reason behind it. And she then told her children to hark. She told her children to listen to the entire conversation that was taking place. They listened accordingly. The younger children had been put to bed in another room, but with an open door between, so that they could be heard talking busily among themselves. One and all seemed to have caught the infection from the fireside circle, and were outvying each other in wild wishes and childish projects of what they would do when they came to be men and women. At length, a little boy, instead of addressing his brothers and sisters, called out to his mother. So, the children were actually listening to everything very, very diligently. The younger children of the family, they were put to bed. That means they were made to fall asleep in the other room. But there was an open door, okay, that separated the living room where the elders were sitting and talking and the room of the children. And since that door was open, the children could very well hear whatever conversation was taking place outside. One and all seemed to have got the infection from the fireside circle. Now, what is an infection? Something that spreads. And what infection was this fireside circle? This circle of adults who were sitting around the fireside and were talking their heart out. So what infection did it have? It had spread on to the children also, because they also started outvying each other in wild wishes. So even they started dreaming, even they started thinking what they would do when they would grow up, when they would become men and women, what projects they are going to take up. So all these thoughts started coming to their mind. There was a boy among them who, rather than talking to his brothers and sisters, he called out to his mother and said, "I'll tell you what I wish, mother," cried he. "I want you and father and grandmom and all of us and the stranger too to start right away and go and take a drink out of the basin of the flume." So he told his mother that I will tell you what is my desire, and cried out. Now here, crying does not mean that he started crying. It means that he sort of shouted, since he was in the other room and the elders were in the other room. So he had to raise his volume. So he spoke to his mother that I want that you, father, grandmom, all of us and the stranger also, we should go to the basin of the flume and drink water out of it. Now, what is the basin of the flume? We will read that in the next paragraph. Nobody could help laughing at the child's notion of leaving a warm bed and dragging them from a cheerful fire to visit the basin of the flume, a brook which tumbles over the precipice deep within the notch. The boy had hardly spoken when a wagon rattled along the road and stopped a moment before the door. It appeared to contain 2 or 3 men who were cheering their hearts with the rough chorus of a song, which resounded in broken notes between the cliffs, while the singers hesitated whether to continue their journey or put up here for the night. So the moment the child expressed his desire of going to the basin of the flume and drinking water out of it, everybody who was present there, they started laughing at him. Why did they start laughing? Because according to them, this notion, this idea of leaving the warm bed and getting up from this circle, this fireside, was something which was non-acceptable, and going to the basin of the flume. Now, what is the basin of the flume? It is a brook a river, a small stream of river that tumbles over the precipice deep within the notch. So as I had told you, there was a precipice, there was a huge rock which was almost opposite the cottage of this family. So there was a brook, a river, which was flowing through this piece of rock and would go deep in this notch, that V structure which is formed in the mountains. So the river would go deep in the notch, and the boy wanted that he, along with his family, should go there and drink water from it. And obviously the adults found this idea to be very amusing. They found it very funny. Now the boy had hardly stopped speaking when they heard a wagon rattled along the door. Wagon is a cart, okay, that is driven by a horse. So they heard the rattle. Rattle is the sound. If there is a horse and there is a cart attached to the horse, you will obviously be able to hear the sound. So they heard the sound of a wagon outside their door. It seemed to them from the noises that they were 2 to 3 men who were singing a song in chorus. So they were singing a song together, and that song resounded between the cliffs. Obviously, resounding is coming back, echoing. When you go to a mountain and you shout, you all know you'd be able to hear your voice back. So between those mountain cliffs, the songs that those singers were singing were resounding, were kind of echoing in the entire valley. While the singers hesitated whether to continue their journey or put up here for the night. So why did the singers stop in front of the cottage gate? Because they were hesitating. They were thinking whether they should stay at that cottage for the night or they should continue with that journey. So just, they stopped for a couple of minutes because they were in a fix. Father, said the girl, they are calling you by name. So the eldest daughter told her father that the men outside were calling him by name. But the good man doubted whether they had really called him and was unwilling to show himself too solicitous of gain by inviting people to patronize his house. He therefore did not hurry to the door, and the lash being soon applied, the travellers plunged into the notch, still singing and laughing, though their music and mirth came back drearily from the heart of the mountain. So, that good man, the reason why the father has been described as a good man is because if he would have been somebody greedy, the thought of more people standing outside the cottage would have actually motivated him to go out and to call them inside on his own so that he'd be able to make more money. But this man was not that kind. He was unwilling. He did not want to go out on his own. He did not want to show that he was very much solicitous, that he was interested to get profit by these people whom he would promise to take care of in his cottage. He therefore did not hurry out. He sat there and he heard that the door, the outside door of his cottage was closed again. The travellers plunged. Plunged is they went towards the notch. They were still singing and they're laughing and their merry, their cheerful and fun sounds could be heard by these people in the mountains, but since they were now singing from a distance, they seemed very dreary. They seemed a little sad and depressive to them. "There, mother," cried the boy again. "They'd have given us a ride to the flume." Now this boy who wanted to go to the basin of the flume to drink water out of it, He was still thinking about the same, and he told his mother that we should have stopped those people. They would have given us a ride. They would have given us a lift till the flume. Again, they laughed at the child's pertinacious fancy for a night ramble. But it happened that a light cloud passed over the daughter's spirit. She looked gravely into the fire and drew a breath that was almost a sigh. It forced its way in spite of a little struggle to repress it. Then, starting and blushing, she looked quickly round the circle, as if they had caught a glimpse into her bosom. The stranger asked what she had been thinking of. So they again started laughing at the child's pertinacious fancy. Pertinacious, obviously the child was so determined. The child had decided that he would go for a night ramble, that he would go for a night outing, leaving his bed and leaving this warm cottage. So they started laughing. But there was a light cloud that passed over the daughter's spirit. Now, a light cloud that passed over the daughter's spirit means that the daughter suddenly grew a little sad and depressed. And how do we know that? Because she looked into the fire gravely with a very serious expression. She looked into the fire. She drew a breath that was a sigh. So she sighed. We usually sigh when we are unhappy. And she did try to repress it. She did try to control it. But then that did come out of her, from her. And the other people in the room, they were looking at her. And when she noticed that she was being looked at, she started blushing. Her cheeks grew red. And the stranger asked her the reason why she sighed. He asked her the reason or what she was thinking about. The daughter said nothing, answered she with a downcast smile. Only I felt lonesome just then. So the daughter said that there isn't anything that I'm thinking about. And she had a very downcast, a very sad smile on her face. And she just replied that there are moments when she feels very lonesome, when she feels very lonely in life. Now to this, the stranger said, "Oh, I have always had a gift of feeling what is in other people's hearts," said he half seriously. "Shall I tell the secrets of yours? For I know what to think when a young girl shivers by a warm hearth and complains of lonesomeness at her mother's side. Shall I put these feelings into words?" So now this stranger, he started teasing the girl. He started pulling her leg and half seriously, that means half joking, half serious, he told the girl that, I have always had this talent to tell what is in the heart of the other people. He said that, should I tell others what is going on in your heart right now? He said that you are, sitting in front of a hearth, that is this fireplace, and still you are shivering. You are living with your mother and still you are feeling lonely. So do you know what is the reason behind this when a young girl starts developing these feelings? Now the girl replied, they would not be a girl's feelings any longer if they could be put into words. Replied the mountain nymph, laughing but avoiding his eye. Mountain nymph, the word has been used for the girl who obviously was a mountain girl. She lived in the mountains. So she replied to the stranger, she replied to the guest by saying that if you can put the feelings of a girl onto paper, if you can put the feelings of a girl in words, you can never call them a girl's feelings. Okay. So she replied this to the man, but she did not look at him at that time. All this was said apart. Perhaps a germ of love was springing in their hearts. so pure that it might blossom in paradise. Since it could not be matured on earth, for woman worships such gentle dignity as his, and the proud contemplative, yet kind soul is oftenest captivated by simplicity like hers. But while they spoke softly, and he was watching the happy sadness, the lightsome shadows, the shy yearnings of a maiden's nature, the wind through the notch took a deeper and drearer sound. Okay, so now what happened? All this was said apart. Now obviously whatever the stranger said to the girl or the girl replied to the stranger was done. The writer tells us that there was a germ of love that was springing between the two people. So there was a kind of special feeling that was developing between the two of them. But he said that their love was so pure that it is going to find place in the paradise only. Blossom is to grow, to nurture, to become better. So he said that their love was so pure that it would get a chance to grow only in paradise, because such pure love can never mature on earth. Earth is not the place for such pure love. He then said that women like this young girl, they always worship a person like this stranger who is so gentle, who is so kind, yet dignified, yet has a very good respectable personality. On the other hand, the proud and the contemplative yet kindly soul is oftenest captivated by simplicity like her. So first the writer described the stranger, that he was gentle, he was respectable, he was proud and contemplative. Contemplative, thoughtful, somebody who had the brains to think. So he was thoughtful. On the other hand, the girl was very simple. And he said that women, such women, they always end up getting the other men captivated by their simplicity. Captivated, fascinated, to be totally blown by something. So he said that the man, the stranger, was obviously fascinated by the beauty and the simplicity of this woman. But while they both were talking to each other softly and the boy was looking at the girl who looked happy yet sad, the lightsome shadows, he looked at the shadows which were there in the room, the yearnings, the internal desires of a young girl, the wind of the notch that changed its course. It became deeper and it became very sad as well. It became sadder. It seemed, as the fanciful stranger said, like the choral strain of the spirits of the blast, who in old Indian times had their dwellings among these mountains and made their heights and recesses a sacred region. There was a wail along the road, as if a funeral was passing. To chase away the gloom, the family threw pine branches on their fire, till the dry leaves crackled and the flame arose, discovering once again a scene of peace and humble happiness. The light hovered about them fondly and caressed them all. There were the little faces of the children peeping from their bed apart, and here the father's frame of strength, the mother's subdued and careful mien, the high-browed youth, the budding girl, and the good old grandmum, still knitting in the warmest place. The aged woman looked up from her task and with fingers ever busy was next to speak. So how did the sound of the wind become sad? It seemed as if there was some choral strain of the spirits of the blast. Spirits, the souls, the spirits refer to the soul of people who die. So, according to the stranger, such sounds could be heard in the old Indian times when it was believed that the mountains with their heights and recesses, that means either the top of the mountain or the depth of the mountain, both these places were, basically a region, a home to the spirits, and such sounds could be heard in that duration. Then the sound on the road of the wind, it looked like a wail. Wail, this term has been used earlier also. It looked as if people were crying with a funeral. Funeral is when somebody dies, there is a group of people who take that dead person to their final abode. So the group of people who are following the dead, they obviously cry. So the sound seemed as if there was a funeral that was passing along the road. And then in order to chase away the gloom, in order to just shoo away with that sadness in the atmosphere, the family threw some more branches of the pine tree into the fire, which crackled, and then the flame grew brighter and caressed them all. So the bright and warm flame of that fire gave all the people in the room more love in the form of its warmth. Then one could see, because of the increased brightness in the room now, the lights of the children who were peeping, who were looking out from their bed could be seen. Then the father could be seen, who was a man with a lot of strength, a lot of power. Then there was the mother, who was subdued and careful mien, who was although a little sad, but she was obviously the mother of the family, so she was very careful with everything. The youth, who was high-browed. This youth here refers to the guest, the ambitious guest. High-browed means who was full of pride, who was full of confidence. The girl, who was budding, who was opening up like a flower. And the grandmom, who was still sitting at the place where she was earlier, and she was still knitting the wool. She looked up at the other people of the room. So although her hands were busy in knitting, but she looked up and she spoke something to the people. She said, "Old folks have their notions," said she, "as well as youngs. You've been wishing and planning and letting your heads run on one thing and another till you've set my mind a-wandering too. Now, what should an old woman wish for when she can go but a step or two before she comes to her grave? Children, it will haunt me night and day till I tell you." So, the old woman, that is the grandmother, finally spoke something. She said that old folks have their notions, the grown-ups, that is the mother and the father, they have shared their ideas. The young ones have also shared their ideas. She said that you all here have been wishing for one thing, have been planning for one thing, and your heads are running from one thing to the other. So, one has some specific desire, the other person has some other desire. So, your hearts are all wandering. And because of you people, because of your continuous planning that is taking place, even my mind has set a wandering. Even my mind has started to think and to plan of something. She said that, "But what can I wish for? I am just an old woman who probably has a few more steps to take before she goes to her grave." So what she meant was that she does not even know how many days or how many years does she have in hand before she dies. But she said that, "Children, there is something that I want to tell you, and if I don't tell you, it will haunt me night and day. Haunt me, it is going to trouble me the whole day." "What is it, mother?" cried the husband and wife at once. The moment the mother said this, both the husband and wife, they got very anxious to know what the mother wanted to tell them. Then the old woman, with an air of mystery which drew the circle closer round the fire, informed them that she had provided her grave clothes some years before. A nice linen shroud, a cap with a muslin ruff, and everything of a finer sort than she had worn since her wedding day. But this evening an old superstition had strangely recurred to her. It used to be said in her younger days that if anything were amiss with a corpse, if only the ruff was not smooth or the cap did not set right, the corpse in the coffin and beneath the cloths would strive to put up its cold hands and arrange it. The bare thought made her nervous. So, now the old woman, who obviously had created an air of mystery. An air of mystery means because of what she had said, the entire environment, the entire atmosphere of the room suddenly had become very strange, and all the people who were sitting in the circle, they actually pulled their chair closer to the grandmother so that they could listen to what she had to say with utmost attention. So the grandmother told them that she had provided her grave clothes some years before. That is, she has already set aside the clothes that she wants to wear in her grave. When she is buried in the coffin, what clothes she wants to be, to wear at that time. She said that it is a nice linen shroud. Shroud is a kind of a cover you are covered with. So it was a nice linen shroud. Then there was a cap which had muslin ruff. Ruff means the frills. So the cap had a lot of frills around it. And everything that she has set aside was very fine. As fine as she had worn on her wedding day. So on somebody's wedding, you always want to dress up the best. So she said that I have set aside as fine the clothes as I had worn on my wedding. But this evening there was an old superstition that recurred to her, that came to her mind. She told them that when she was young, it was said that if there was anything amiss with a corpse, if there was anything wrong with a corpse, with a dead body. And what wrong means the clothes of the dead body were not correct. If those frills of the cap were not smooth or the cap was not placed on the head correctly, the dead body that has been laid in the coffin, even beneath the cloths. Cloths means earth, not only in the coffin but has also been buried in the ground. That dead body actually uses its cold hands and sets them all right. Whatever is the problem with the clothes, the dead body itself, makes it okay. This thought made her very nervous. "Don't talk so, grandmother," said the little girl, shuddering. Obviously, this thought of the dead body moving his or her hands and making your clothes okay was obviously not a very comfortable one for anyone. So the girl started shivering with fear and she told her grandmother not to speak like that. "Now," continued the old woman with singular earnest, yet smiling strangely at her own folly, "I want one of you, my children, when your mother is dressed and in the coffin, I want one of you to hold a looking glass over my face. Who knows but I may take a glimpse at myself and see whether all's right." So the old woman continued with earnestness, with a lot of sincerity. She continued to tell her children something. But at the same time, she was smiling at her folly. She herself felt how stupid the thought sounded. So she told the children that when I die, I want one of you to hold a mirror on my dead face. You never know, I might open my eyes, take a glimpse at myself, take a look at myself in order to make sure whether I am looking good or not. Old and young, we dream of graves and monuments, murmured the stranger youth. I wonder how mariners feel when the ship is sinking and they, unknown and undistinguished, are to be buried together in the ocean, that wide and nameless sepulchre. So the stranger, the guest, he murmured, he spoke very slowly. He said that be it old or young, we always dream of our graves and of the monuments that we want to be built for us when we die. He then talked about the mariners. Who are the mariners? The sailors, the ones who sail in the ship. So he mentioned about the mariners and he said that I wonder how these mariners may feel. Because when they go on a sail, their ship may sink any time in the ocean. And when they die, and at the place where they die, they are not known to anyone. They are not undistinguished. There is nothing special about them. And together they are buried in the ocean at a place which may not be known to anyone. The sea is so wide, okay? So they may be buried anywhere in the ocean and still they have no sepulchre. There is no tomb also that can be built under their name. So they die a very mysterious death where nobody remembers them after they die. For a moment, the old woman's ghastly conception so engrossed the minds of her hearers that a sound abroad in the night, rising like the roar of a blast, had grown broad, deep, and terrible before the fated group were conscious of it. The house and all within it trembled. The foundations of the earth seemed to be shaken, as if this awful sound were the peal of the last trump. Young and old exchanged one wild glance and remained an instant pale, affrighted, without utterance or power to move. Then the same shriek burst simultaneously from all their lips. The slide, the slide. So, when they all were discussing this for a moment, this ghastly conception, this, the opinions of the grandmother, which was so horrifying, had engrossed, had captivated, had made all the people in the room who were her hearers so busy and so fascinated that they altogether ignored a roaring blast, a blast kind of a sound which was getting deeper and stronger. And this group whose fate, whose destiny, whose life was associated with it, they were unaware of this sound. Then suddenly what happened? The house and all the things in the house, they trembled. They started to shiver exactly the way when an earthquake strikes, everything starts to tremble. So everything trembled. The foundations of the earth seemed to be shaken. So not only the earth, but deep inside the earth also, it seemed that everything was shaken. And the sound was so bad, they thought that it was the peal of the last trump, that it was the last sound on the earth. Young and old, everyone in the room, they just exchanged glances, they just looked at each other. They remained pale, affrighted. Their faces were pale. It had lost color. They were affrighted. They were scared. They did not utter anything. Neither did they have the power to move, to get up from their places. Then all together they had the same shriek. They shrieked, they shouted, they screamed the same thing at the same time. And what was it? The slide, the slide. So this is what they all said. That is the landslide. That was the landslide that had occurred. The simplest words must intimate, but not portray, the unutterable horror of the catastrophe. The victims rushed from their cottage and sought refuge in what they deemed a safer spot, where, in contemplation of such an emergency, a sort of barrier had been reared. Alas, they had quitted their security and fled right into the path of destruction. So the writer tells us that the simplest words must imitate but not portray the unutterable horror of the catastrophe. That was a catastrophe. That was a destruction that was taking place. And the words that they spoke were too simple to show something very big, something very major that was about to take place. The victims, that is this family, they rushed out of their cottage, they ran out of their cottage and they sought refuge. They took shelter in a place where they deemed it to be a safer spot. So they went to a place which according to them was safe because they themselves had made that place which had a few barriers, which had a few boundaries in contemplation of such emergency. So since they themselves lived in such a dangerous position, they always had this fear at the back of their mind that something like this might take place. So thinking about the same, they had made that shelter for themselves. Alas, unfortunately, they had quitted. They came out of their security, the place where they were safe, and they came to that place which was on the path of destruction, which was going to be destroyed any moment. Down came the whole side of the mountain in a cataract of ruin. Just before it reached the house, the stream broke into two branches, shivered not a window there, but overwhelmed the whole vicinity, blocked up the road and annihilated everything in its dreadful course. Long ere the thunder of the great slide had ceased to roar among the mountains, the mortal agony had been endured, and the victims were at peace. Their bodies were never found. So, the moment the family reached that place which they thought was safe, the entire side of the mountain came down and it was in the cataract of a ruin. In just a second, it, came down in layers and it was completely destroyed. Now this slide, this stream of rocks that was coming down the mountains, the moment that was about to reach their house, it divided into two parts. And those rocks, those big pieces of stones, they crossed the house without touching even a single window. So the house was untouched, the house was unharmed, it was unaffected. Everything came down except for the house. The roads were blocked. The entire vicinity, the entire neighborhood of the house was totally destroyed. The slide, the thunderous sound of the slide could be heard across the mountains, and the mortal agony. The people whose death was bound to happen because of it that had taken place, all the victims were at peace, everybody had died, and their bodies could never be found. The next morning, the light smoke was seen stealing from the cottage chimney up the mountainside. Within the fire was yet smouldering on the hearth, and the chairs in a circle round it, as if the inhabitants had but gone forth to view the devastation of the slide, and would shortly return to thank heaven for their miraculous escape. All had left separate tokens by which those who had known the family were made to shed a tear for each. Who has not heard their name? The story has been told far and wide, and will forever be a legend of these mountains. Poets have sung their fate. Now the next morning, smoke was still coming out of the chimney of this cottage, and inside the house there was still some fire in the fireplace as well. The chairs were kept in the circle as they were kept last night, and it seemed the house was such, it seemed as if the people who were living in the house, they had just gone out to see all the destruction that has been caused by the slide and would come back any moment, and would thank the God for this escape, for the miraculous escape, for this wondrous escape that they have had. Every family member had left behind a token, something that belongs to them, and so whosoever is going to find that token, the people who were close to the family, they would actually hold that token and would cry for the loss of that person. But their story, their name, their family was well known. Everyone knew about them. Each and every person in the mountain was aware of them. They were a story, they were a legend. Their stories is going to be passed on to generations. And the poets also have written multiple poems on this family. There were circumstances which led some to suppose that a stranger had been received into the cottage on this awful night and had shared the catastrophe of all its inmates. Others denied that there were sufficient grounds for such a conjecture. Woe for the high-souled youth, with his dream of earthly immortality, his name and person utterly unknown, his story, his way of life, his plans, a mystery never to be solved. His death and his existence equally a doubt. Whose was the agony of that death moment? So then the writer tells us that the people of the mountain, they were just supposing that there was a stranger who had entered the cottage last night, and who, along with the inmates, along with the house members, had died in that landslide. But there were others who simply denied this conjecture, who simply denied. They said that there wasn't anything like that. Now, the writer tells us that woe for the high-souled youth. Woe, what happened with that youth? What happened with that guest who had such high ambitions in life was very sad. He always dreamt of being immortal. He wanted to be remembered after he dies. But now his name and his presence was not known. Nobody knew his name. Nobody even knew whether he was a part of that landslide catastrophe or not. His way of life, how did he live, what plans he had in his life, it was a mystery that nobody could solve now. His death and his existence were a doubt. Nobody knew whether he was alive or he was dead. Nobody was aware of it. Whose was the agony of the death moment? So the writer actually asks us that who, according to you, had a bad death? The family, who obviously died but is going to be remembered throughout, or that man who shared the fate, the destiny of that family, who wanted to be remembered by one and all after he dies. But now that he actually was dead, not a single person knew whether he was alive or he died. So this, my dear students, was the story, The Ambitious Guest. I am going to pause here now. In my next lecture, I will discuss with you the summary of this chapter, plus we'll discuss the back exercises. So I shall see you all now in my next lecture. Thank you.